What's up, friends? Welcome to Leaders, Letters, and Legacy alongside one of my very favorite people on the planet, Dr. Marianne Calais. I'm your host, Scott Fussell, and we are thrilled that you decided to tap play and spend some time with us today. We'd love you to consider Leaders, Letters, and Legacy a verbal archives from many of the stories and people who have shaped the fraternity sorority movement for the past 2+ centuries. It's time we shine a light on leaders. It's time we help them write a letter about their letters. It's time we talk about the legacy we want to leave behind. It's time for another episode of Leaders, Letters, and Legacy. Let's go. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Letters, Leaders, and Legacy. We are so happy that you decided to spend some time with us today. Alongside my good friend, Dr. Marianne Calais, I'm Scott Fussell, and we are so happy that you decided to spend some time with us today. We have an amazing show and an incredible guest, and are thrilled to get into this conversation today. Hopefully sharing a little bit about love letter to his organization and talk a little bit about the legacy that we hope to lean into and to leave behind. So, Mac, what's up? How you doing today?
I'm great, Scott. And I'm excited to tell you about my friend Dan Shaver. You know, when Scott and I were coming up with a list of leaders and legends, Dan was one of the first people that I thought of. And the reason being is that when I served as national president for Theta Phi Alpha, there was so much we just did not know. And there was this good looking guy that came in, tall, dressed to the nine, and he starts talking about trademarks and licensing. And I am sitting there like a deer in headlights going, I have no idea what this guy is talking about. And I listened intently, and I had a lot of questions afterwards and waited in line while the other people had questions. And Dan, I believe, has helped protect our industry's integrity, not just branding when people think about branding, but the integrity of our letters, our marks, our symbols. And Dan has really helped us to protect what I believe our founders started for us. And so at a time when they didn't need to protect all of that, Dan brought it into a space. And he's been one of the industry leaders to help us to continue to learn how do we make sure that the integrity and the values of our organizations are kept where they're supposed to be. So Dan, so excited that you could join us. You definitely helped me at an early time in my career as a volunteer, and just so grateful for your ability to put everything together. The other part about that is you are a true fraternity man. As I talk to students and we talk about frat boys versus fraternity men, or a fraternity man you've lived Sigma Chi's values, and we'll learn a little bit more, but you've lived it in everything you've done. So thank you for being that role model to not only I know hundreds of thousands of Sigma Chi's, but to those of us who have been able to know you through the years. So let's welcome Dan Shaver. We're so happy you're here. So happy you're here.
I'm honored. I'm so honored to be with you both. Thank you for the invitation, truly.
Well, we appreciate it. Well, Dan, we want listeners to get to know you. So can you tell us just a little bit about your journey? Like, how did you get to where, Sigma Chi, your paths crossed, and how has that story unfolded over time for you?
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate it in a very personal way. Some time ago, I was doing a presentation for a big business who was considering making an offer on Affinity, and they wanted to know about the company. And so I started with a picture of my mom and dad, and it was really uncharacteristic for these executives in suits and Fortune 500 company to start my presentation with a picture. And I said, everything you need to know about me is in this picture. And my mom, before she died about 14 years ago from cancer, unfortunately, but before she died, when I was a kid, she said, hey, Dan, or Danny, when you decide who you want to be, surround yourself with those kind of people. And so while I went to school at Texas Tech in 1988, and went through the recruitment process, I just tried to keep that in my mind. And I kept looking at a lot of organizations who offered so many great things. And it was really difficult for me because they all stood for incredibly lofty principles and ideals. But all of a sudden I found a group of men that I felt just a genuine connection to. And I felt like They were a mirror to who I really wanted to be. And they were kind and they were thoughtful and they were authentic. And so I joined Sigma Chi in the fall of 1988 and then went on from there to become a leader of the chapter and a new member educator and then to be chapter president. And then all of a sudden here, you have a consultant who's coming through and while you're both nervous, you're both curious and nervous. And it's sort of that scary fun of having somebody from the international organization. And at the end of that meeting, he invited me to apply for a job at Sigma Chi headquarters. And I think I went and applied for a job at Sigma Chi headquarters, and I was lucky enough to get the job as a leadership consultant, as a traveling consultant in 1993. And a lot of people ask me, hey, when did you become a Sigma Chi? And I have two answers. I became a member at the end of 88, beginning of 89, but I became a Sigma Chi in the summer of 1993. And I say that because it's when I realized really for the first time the importance of really becoming Sigma Chi meant making a commitment to our values, a commitment to our ideals, a commitment to constant improvement. Whereas before, when I was a chapter, I was so consumed with performance to a ritual and performance to a ceremony and performance to policy that I wasn't really, I think, living out what Ed King would talk about in terms of living out the ritual and making everybody aware of what our ritual is. There's nothing secret about our ideals. There's nothing secret about your quest to achieve those ideals. The only thing that is secretive are the words we use and in the ceremonies we make or that we partake in. So that was my journey towards joining Sigma Chi and being around people who ultimately shaped who I am today as a leader, as a father, as a business owner. That was my introduction into the world of Greek and into the world of fraternities and sororities and some of my closest friends. And that has been a great gift.
That's awesome.
I need to ask a follow-up there. I think you went on Sigma Chi staff a couple of years before I joined Beta's staff. And I remember my first interfraternal gathering was a consultant training opportunity here in Indy. And we went to Theta Chi, their headquarters, and this guy named Dave Westall stood up in front of us and he did a couple-hour session on hazing on trial and completely rocked my world. And it was the first time I realized that, I thought we had a monopoly on all the all-stars. And so that was, so when you start to realize these other organizations have these extraordinary people, man, just what your head opens up to, like the learning that comes from all those people is extraordinary. I got to go back even further though. When you were describing going through recruitment, you said you described those guys as kind and authentic. Can you describe what kind and authentic looked like, how it showed up back then?
Yeah, I think to me, it was a feeling. Truly, it was hard to describe, but it was a feeling of warmth, acceptance, a feeling that who I was enough, that I was worthy of respect. I was worthy of their time and of their attention. And while I was seeking to join them, they made me feel like I was an asset to where they were at and where they were going. I think I felt relevant. And when I was first came to school and went to Texas Tech and, so scared of what that experience was going to be like, my biggest fear was, frankly, I wasn't going to find myself. And here that I was going to get lost as a number at a massive school, and yet to show up and to be elevated in a way that said, hey, we see you. We know, we can tell who you are. We want to know more about you, and you're enough. Made a major difference in giving me the confidence to attend my classes and the confidence to reach out and to form new relationships. So I think that level of authenticity showed up as a feeling of warmth and acceptance.
I love that. And Dan, you started with a picture of your parents at that really big, important meeting.
Yeah.
How did the values that you grew up with, how did Sigma Chi help you to take those to the next level?
Oh, that's such a good question. My mom and dad never talked about our values in terms of this is who we are as a family. And we didn't have any ceremonies around. I just knew what was right because of what mom and dad would react to, or I would model in many ways how they would respond, good and bad, respond to different situations. And so a lot of what I felt like I had breadcrumbs of exactly where I wanted to go and who I wanted to be like. But then all of a sudden, Sigma Chi came in, and I joined without knowing them. But all of a sudden, as I learned the history of Sigma Chi and as I started to really understand the ritual of Sigma Chi, I was like, wow, it opened me up to a structure and a framework that I could rely upon and a filter. I think one of the I often look at that ritual book as one of the greatest leadership books I've ever read, because I look at these ideals as a filter for my decision making, and to say, wow, and I grew up in Texas to where people would go to church and there was a structure around their behavior. For me, that was like I was indoctrinated into a world that said, wow, there are a bunch of people who are literally not judging me, but encouraging me to use these ideals as a filter for my decision making. And it was more formulated later after graduation, to where that became much more ingrained in my being. But early on, I think just the practice of ceremony and the fact that every week we would sit in the presence of each other, listen to truly listening to one another, and that we were repeating the words. It was sometimes an uncomfortable filter, because it highlighted the fact that our behavior wasn't there. There was an incongruence between what these words on this page said we were about and what we saw happening. But that repetition gave more structure to my values that really told me there's a path towards improvement here.
Yeah. You got me thinking about a book called Leading with Soul that I read, gosh, probably 20 years ago. And it talks about the difference between ceremony and ritual. And a ceremony is a celebration. A ritual is something you do. So I love, like when you think about a baseball player who's got the same routine that he does every time he steps up to the plate. Or if you watch a basketball player, they've got the same ritual. They've got the same routine that they do. It's something that they do every time they step to the free throw line. That's what makes it real. So the ceremony, incredible celebration, but how do we make the ceremony come to life? Well, that's through the ritual. That's through the doing of it. And I love that you were hearing those words every single week. And some guys are just crushing it and they're walking this out beautifully, and others maybe we need to have a conversation with. But how common do you think that is? Was that at your chapter at Texas Tech? And today's collegiate members, do you think that still lands? Do you think that is still happening? Are they hearing the words every week? Do you feel like they're walking them out? And when they're not walking them out, how effectively are they holding each other accountable and elevating each other, to use the word you said earlier, which I thought was beautiful? Give me your thoughts on those pieces.
Yeah, I think it depends wildly. And I think where you have a culture of accountability and a culture of curiosity and a less of a fixed mindset. Sometimes you can see it where the more intractable somebody seems, I find the less likely they are to learn and to grow and to push and to hold themselves accountable. But when I find somebody who's open and curious, I feel they're the most malleable. I think those words are ready. So this notion of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when the fraternity man is open, the ritual will guide. And when somebody is shut down and like, oh no, I know exactly how I'm going to behave, and I learned from my coach or my dad or whoever in my life because I was an Eagle Scout and I was this, and I know exactly who I am. I think sometimes that's a barrier for the ritual to become more immersed. I beg for openness. I beg for curiosity. I beg for that level of willingness to consider other thoughts and ideas. But when we see that happen, I think we create a culture of growth and a culture of improvement and a culture truly of vulnerability. And as it's stated so eloquently, I think, and scientifically in the boy crisis, it says, a boy who cannot describe the hole in his heart will devolve into video games, into substance abuse, sometimes sexual violence. To me, when we can create an atmosphere of vulnerability and authenticity and a less of a fixed mindset, I think that ritual absolutely shows up. And I think accountability doesn't feel so judgmental. It feels more as a checkpoint.
Well, it comes from a loving place.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right.
And Dan, you mentioned Ed King. Sometimes I wish people didn't age because Ed was one of those people who helped me and helped so many of us during that era of time, probably for 20 to 30 years on college campuses, to really understand the importance of the ritual. And I love how today we're just talking. I mean, like, we didn't come on and say, today we're going to talk about ritual. It's just a part of the conversation because it's the heart of who we are. I keep a picture of my founders. You can see them behind me. I keep a picture of the Theta Phi Alpha founders because I want to be reminded that they created and helped to create something that has been passed down through generation after generation, even if it's changed, right? It's still the core is still the same. And so Ed taught us to really look at the ritual as a way of life. And I know that he's a mentor and someone who's been a guide for you, but what do you think about, because in today's world, people don't really commit to ceremonies the same way. And,
Yeah.
Even during the pandemic, for organizations to have to perform a ritual on Zoom like this, you can't feel the emotion. You can't feel, we can do our best, right? But how did Ed and other men and whoever else came, maybe even some of your peers, right? How did they teach you that we're not just social organizations, that the foundation of who we are as humans and as members, that repetition and that conversation and that being passed down, this is the expectation. How's that shown up in your life? Because I know it has.
I think for me, the mentors in my life convinced me that I had a pen in writing the history of the organization, that it wasn't that it was done. It's like I was a part of it. And I think that this concept of, yes, our founders existed and they interpreted the world at that time, and they used these ideals as a filter for their decisions in very different life circumstances. But we evolve and we grow, and every generation, we don't just perform a ritual as sort of a tribute to the past. We perform a ritual as an invitation to the future. And it's sort of a sense that I have a pen and I get to write a part of that future. And I can write it in a way that honors our history, or I can write in a way that detracts from it, but that I have an equal power. And just as our early founders actually removed a member from membership because they were not aligned with the ideals, it was one of our first forms of, I'm going to invite you off of this bus if you can't abide by the same principles, because otherwise we have a values incongruence and we're going to make each other's lives miserable. But this notion of, hey, we are still creating this ritual. And while the words might not change, the ritual itself is constantly changing because of how we live and how we behave and how we act on these things. So I think it was that the people in my life taught me that ritual wasn't static. It was not something that was fixed. It was something that we sometimes change, we sometimes adapt, we sometimes improve, but that every generation is learning to act out the ritual in very different terms, right? Our early founders, they didn't have chapter rooms. They met out in the public and they met out in hidden places. And then all of a sudden, wow, we had chapter rooms, and now we've got different. And then we all of a sudden through the pandemic had Zoom. And how do we adapt? Well, we adapt by being creative, and we adapt by being open and intentional, to use a word that Scott uses. And so I think that's how it has played out for me. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so inspired by it, because I think to myself, wow, if the power of that ritual allowed me to make the decisions that enabled me to create a company that grew to where it's at today, imagine the gift I can give to other people, helping them earlier recognize their role in creating the future for themselves, but also for the fraternity.
That's beautiful. What's interesting for me is I know you've advised young men, you've advised chapters, you've been deeply involved in Horizons, really one of the forefront leading programs that other organizations have tried to emulate and replicate, and as you used the word mimic earlier. The fact that you started a business that has helped shape the industry. Like, do you really think about your legacy? And I mean, we all look at ourselves, and I'm going to be 60 in April, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember starting to listen to people when they were in their 60s. But I mean, Dan, you've really had, you've put your print on the industry for many years now. And do you think about your influence on others?
I get asked that question occasionally, and it's hard for me to spend time there. It really is. But I will say I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the work I've done and the work our company does to help protect the fraternal experience. I will say early on, it was about needs identification. And it was really this sense of, wait, if not me, then who's going to do this? And it was all around protection. I mean, early on when I was traveling for Sigma Chi as a consultant, and I would see everyone this was back in the early 90s, and the use of trademarks were and the offensive designs and yet here I'm out on the road at going to all these chapters talking about values and integrity and positive programming. And then I would see the shirt that says something awful about little sisters or something terrible that I call the grocery store test, when you just no matter, you've got all this delicious food and then your stomach gets turned by looking at somebody's t-shirt in front of you. And you think, well, how's our reputation in the market? All the work and money that we put into positive programming is completely ruined and wasted when we allowed a t-shirt to define the public's perception of who we are. Yep. And so for me, it was like, wait, we have a legal right to say no to that, right? And so I would go and ask the questions and found out that yes, in fact, we did have a right to say no. And the best in the rule of a trademark, and I learned early in my career, and that really guided me through the whole process, was the only real legal obligation of a trademark owner is you have to control it to keep ownership. And I thought, well, my goodness, these Greek organizations, not only are they missing an opportunity for control, they are literally putting themselves in risk of abandoning their trademark or losing their trademark for failure to control. And so at that time, I was starting to do the trademark work for Sigma Chi and realized the industry didn't want it. They were very resistant to giving up control and paying a royalty, the rightful royalty. I often say, if somebody took your car out of your driveway and ran an Uber, and you said, hey, can you reimburse me maybe for the gas and maybe the wear and tear on that car? And they're like, how dare you? How dare you ask me to give you, no, everyone would agree that someone's going to take your property and use it for their own personal and professional benefit. Getting some minor commission is reasonable. And finally, we were able to go and I was able to align organizations, starting with Jacques Fouclain of Sigma Phi Epsilon and Dwayne Weimer of Delta Tau Delta and Wynn Smiley, and then Larry Weiss, and all these people who have been industry true leaders who trusted me to help manage their brand. And I felt I will tell you, I rarely take time to be really too self-congratulatory, because I feel such an obligation to those people that I told them, I'm gonna help defend you. And so when I take on a client, it's a personal challenge to me. And it is really about feeling like I'm their security guard. And yes, am I going to get paid for it on the back end? Principles before profit, always. And everybody I talk to, I'm like, I am principles before profit. We said no to Barbie. Who wanted to do a sorority Barbie, because back then, the Barbie was only white and size 0, essentially. And we said, I'm sorry. Our principles tell us this is the wrong move. And guess what? 5 years later, Barbies came out with different representation. And I thought, you know what? Us saying no, whether it had an impact or not, I feel like I could have made a lot of money. That wasn't the priority. Priority was integrity. Priority was making sure the Greek organizations are well represented in the marketplace. And so that, to me, every once in a while, though, I look out and I've got a team of people, and all told, we've got about 30 total staff members. And I'm like, we're building software and we're creating all the next version of enforcement bots that scrub the internet and look for infringement. We're doing so many cool things. Every once in a while, I pinch myself because I've got all these talented people. And I feel like, wow, this decision that I made all those years ago. And again, this values exploration that I just went and said, there's somebody needs to do this and I'll figure out how to do it. But somebody, the why, it's needed. The how, I'll do it. I'll do it within. And the three values we held on to are integrity, compassion, and progress. And that's the three values that our company makes. Every company, every employee here is taught that you act with integrity. You do what's right when nobody's looking. We can be compassionate to each other, our clients, our vendors, but we focus keenly on progress. And that has very fraternally guided all of us in this now almost 28 years of business.
Wow. But Dan, do you realize that those men that you just named, it was your integrity and the fact that they would trust you, right? That's you living out Sigma Chi's values, whether we know them or not, right? And I think that's the part in today that gets lost, is that the relationships built on trust, right, have helped you to build a business and helped you to build a legacy that will be passed on to someone, right? Because somewhere along the line, you did it with integrity and it has protected us. I mean, I think back for almost 30 years, what if it would have been just the Wild Wild West, right? Anybody could do anything. And I worry today even still that there are some things that we need to rein back in, But I think it was built upon people knew you were a man of integrity. They knew that if you said you were going to do something the way you said you were going to do it, you were going to do that. And I mean, I've heard you get upset when it was put into question, right? I mean, when you're like, this is what we said, and now you've changed this, and that's not okay. But you've stood by that. And for somebody to be able to do that for the majority of their years, I think one of the things I love about the three of us on the screen, we've been members of our organization longer than we've not.
Well, that's right.
Right?
That is not helpful.
And now he's going to chime in with this little bit of smile.
Wow.
When you think about it, commitments today are hard to keep, right? Commitments are hard to keep. The world gives us a lot of opt-outs. And in fraternity and sorority, people opt out all the time. What makes it different, Dan, that you have not only said, I'm going to take Sigma Chi with me, but I'm going to continue to give back. I'm going to continue to give my time, talent, treasure, because you've done all those things, to not only Sigma Chi, but so many of us in the industry. What makes your story still important to continue to develop and to journey with?
Well, I think what it is, honestly, I think it's that I will never tire of people who are constantly striving for improvement. I just will never tire of that. Like, I think in any other industry I could have gone to, and it could have been about shareholder value, and it could have been I could have gone just the corporate world. And it really it's about metrics. And while ours is too, at the heart of what we deal with are people who are striving, and it's organizations who are constantly trying to make a bigger, more positive impact. And I get inspired by that. When I just got back from NPC, and to see all of these friends who inspire me and who are constantly navigating a difficult world and are doing it with integrity and are showing up in a way that says, we are trying to make a better generation of men and women who are healthier than we were, who are better equipped to handle depression, better equipped to handle anxiety, better equipped to make authentic connections with one another, better equipped to talk about themselves in a way when they're interviewing for a job that is rooted in their values, better able to enforce boundaries, better able to negotiate, frankly, some of their non-negotiables. And I think, to me, man, if I can be a part of that parade, if I can do sort of the background work that allows those symbols to show up in a way that highlights the ideals, where those symbols aren't connected with something negative. Those symbols are connected with things that are lofty. Like, that's what I know, is the symbols on the products aren't decorations. They are a charge to behave in a way that honors our founders. And so when I see Greek letters, I don't see a decoration. I don't see a logo like I see a Nike swoosh. I see a promise, and I see potential. And so one of the reasons why I'm so passionate still to this day, now 28 years later, is because I don't think that work is done. I think that we can continue every day to improve and make sure that members get to wear those letters that inspires them, and not something that they feel like they have to put away because they're embarrassed.
I love, oh gosh, this theme of being in pursuit of something has been throughout your entire, all of your, every comment you've made. This pin is for you to help continue to write the story, to the passion you continue to have with helping our young people continue to do this, but do it better than we did it and healthier than we did it. Just the whole thought of this being a journey. There's many of us, when we were initiated, we think, oh sweet, there's the finish line. No, that's the start line. You were initiated. That means to initiate something. It means to start something. So that is, gosh, that is so in everything that you've said so far. So help me with this one. How do we, or what are we doing currently to find the next Dan Shaver, the next Dr. Mary Ann Calais, and our collegiate members that are currently in the thick of the undergraduate experience, but early in their journey? What can we do to ensure that they are like, yeah, that's how I should be living my life, and whether it's personal or professional, that's how I'm going to, those principles, that's what's I'm going to let guide my life. That's my North Star. How do we get them to continue to pursue it? What can we do practically?
Such a good question. To me, I think we have to reframe that there's valor in vulnerability. I think we have to go into this idea that one of the greatest strengths the best muscle we can build, especially for men, the best muscle we can build is one of vulnerability, and to give up perfection and to focus on pursuit and to focus on improvement. And I think if we can come in terms of vulnerability and authenticity, and again, I'll come back to how I was fortunately welcomed in with a sense of acceptance. It's that we all have a role. I think sometimes members feel like I either fit or I don't fit, and I have a role or I don't have a role. The issue is that's a moment in time. They look at this collegiate experience as, wait, is this the right group of people that I'm going through right now? Well, that's just a flashpoint in an experience that has a lifelong implications. So I think also, like for me, it's about teaching them that we are going to open a door, and then you invite them to walk through that door and recognize that when they walk through that door, they are needed there. When they walk through that door, they are an essential part of our future. When they come through that they are relevant, and to recognize their worth. Because I think sometimes we invite people in and then we ask them to adapt to the current culture, and they feel like they either fit or they don't fit. And bottom line is, if they're in pursuit of those principles, if they're in pursuit of those ideals, then they fit. They fit because the culture will then become them. And I think if we're going to go out and try to find the next Dan Shaver, who, when I was young, I didn't want to be judged. I wanted to be accepted. And, again, it's part of this book that somebody recommended I read, which I'm halfway through, about secure love and attachment theory. I was anxious. I was anxious, and I wanted validation, and I wanted to know I was okay, and that I was accepted. And thankfully for me, Sigma Chi at Texas Tech did that. The people that brought me in did that for me, knowingly or unknowingly. I suspect unknowingly. I think I just happened to be a beautiful accident where the right people were there in pursuit of these ideals, made me feel comfortable. And then from there, I think, though, we have to formulate that. We have to create structure to that. We have to be, again, Scott, intentional about seeking out men who are willing to be open-minded, who want to experience vulnerability in a way that is true, and that their sense of who they are as a person, whether they're rough and tumble or whether they have mental health challenges, whether they are, no matter what their background, but they are willing to open themselves up, stay curious, stay interested in improvement. And I think we will invite an entirely new generation of members that help us maintain a very important role in society if we do that.
I wish I could just bottle him up.
This is the most tweetable podcast ever. I'm not even bothering to take notes because I'm just going to go back and watch this back 5 or 10 more times. And gosh, I'm just so grateful for you being in pursuit of something and the way you're modeling it. And I'm really excited for collegiate members in Sigma Chi because they have someone like you in a leadership position to model the way you're modeling it for them. The next Dan Shaver shows up because you show up to a convention or you show up to a chapter and somebody just says, that's how I want to live. I want to walk like that guy. I am trying to be mindful of time, but Dan, I could talk to you for another 3 hours.
Yeah. I had the privilege and opportunity to spend about a week and a half in Costa Rica with Dan, and we were on a trip with some young Tri Delta leaders and some other folks, and that was for me a very formative time for me to figure out like who was I and where was I going in this industry, and what was my role? You know, I think we evolve and we go through ages and stages of life, and Dan and I had some of the most remarkable experiences and conversations. I think that's one of the things that I would hope to leave with. You know, Scott and Dan didn't know each other before today. And I was just so excited that you all would be in the same space just because you do see things and you want better. And I believe, and not just men, but we need good men to be leading young men and women, but I believe our men need fraternity today more than ever, but it's got to be done right. And we've got to help to raise them to be good community members, good fathers, good spouses, good partners, good business leaders, whatever it is, because the world needs them. And so, you know, the fact that I get to be on this with the two of you who are just remarkable men who, you know, and I think vulnerability is such a great word for the three of us, and hopefully for our listeners out there, that sometimes we go through stuff, you know? I mean, that's just part of life. I spoke at a conference a couple summers ago and Dan showed up and he's like, I just showed up. I wanted to see you. And like, I don't even know if you know what that meant to me, but, you know, oftentimes I feel like we all are just trying to figure out where we belong, how we belong, and that what we do and what we believe in matters. And so, Dan, I just want to thank you because you are one of those people that even I think when nobody's watching, you're always doing the right thing. And so thank you for leading and continuing to just challenge but support, but you have made a huge difference. So as we close today, because we really could sit and listen to you, and I just love the way that you've shared. I don't even think you realize how you might want to pen your own book, because the way you see fraternity needs to be preserved. You might want to think about that. I know this guy who could help you like do trademarks. But what would you to leave our listeners with today when people say, is fraternity still worth it in 2024? What do you tell them?
You know, I would say that all depends on whether what they're interested in is a life of rich discovery. If they are not interested in a life of rich discovery and they want to play it safe and they want to simply sort of, you know, exist and go through life and not push themselves, you know what, then maybe that's not right for them. But if somebody is interested in more choices in their life, if they're interested in being around other people who are going to look at themselves through a lens of improvement, not perfection, but through a lens of improvement, then there's nothing more powerful than to be around folks that they can mimic, with, that they can learn from, they can grow from, and I see the love. I mean, there's nothing more wonderful than to celebrate achievement with people that you love and feel connected with. And oftentimes, again, I talk to a lot of leaders, and I say, hey, when you are in the pursuit of excellence and you're in the pursuit of improvement, man, the celebration part feels so much more deserved than when, if we are actually pursuing celebration without the achievement, without the improvement, then it feels empty. It feels like, oh, we're taking a break from responsibility. So I think for those who really want to understand the fraternal movement and want to give themselves to something that's progressive and that allows them to and frankly opens up so many doors in their lives for more choices, more impact, more self-discovery, more growth, and the fraternal movement is designed for it, designed for them. And I think we will be relevant, provided we don't become fixed in our concepts, fixed in our ritual, fixed in this is the only way to live out our fraternal promise. And we cannot make excuses for bad behavior. We have to say, let's do better. Let's always commit to doing better. And I think if that happens, we'll have a very strong history. And I think the people that we invite to join us will get so much richness, as I have in my professional career, in my personal life. They'll get so much from it. I mean, I just look at my daughter and I look at my son, and I see modeled back this level of recognizing my silliness and recognizing my faults and my failures, but also seeing my heart. And I think, well, thank God for the chance that I was able to go through an experience that gave me the tools to show up in a way that allows them to see it all.
Scott, I'll let you close that out. I think you might be speechless. Wow.
Lots of thoughts here. I just think what you model for your members and what you model for your family is extraordinary. I have tried to get a lot better at not just saying thank you for showing up, but to say thank you for the value, the characters that you are bringing into our conversations. And Dan, you brought a commitment and connection and vulnerability and authenticity to this conversation that I can't thank you enough for. Your principles over profit comment hit me in the chest, because you can't be a man of principle part of the time. You either have integrity or you do not. And as I've gotten to know you through this conversation, clearly it's not that people saw that in you some of the time. They trust you because they've seen you this way all of the time, and they know that you live the values of the organization, and that's why they trust you. And the fact that we've got somebody like that on our conversation here, and that our community has a chance to see your example, we're all just better because of it. So for taking some time to share with us and share with our listeners today, we're so grateful for, but more importantly, the values that you model daily, not just with your organization, with your family, but with those who work with and for you. Man, we're grateful. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
We will be in touch soon. And Dan, this is the part where you get to check out of the call so we can talk about you. So
Thanks.
grateful. All right. Take care, friend.
Bye, friend.
Come on.
I wouldn't bring somebody if I didn't know they were going to bring the game.
Okay. So
He is extraordinary.
yeah, that's a really extraordinary human, and I can't believe I've never met him. And when we talk about wanting to bring conversations of substance to a community, when you want to hear somebody verbalize a love letter to their organization or to the movement, and you want to hear a leader talk about the legacy that he's trying to create for others, that's why we said, yeah, this is probably a pretty good idea, and we should go try to start this podcast.
Today's show was hosted by Dr. Mary Ann Kale and Scott Fussell. For more information, please follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also follow Dr. Mac and Scott on social or on the web at mariannecale.com and scottfuselcoaching.com. Thanks again for tapping play and joining us for another episode of Leaders, Letters, and Legacy. This has been a Mac and Fuzz production.
I think we lost so much of our institutional knowledge, not just Beta, but all of us, like from knowing how to run a chapter meeting, to plan recruitment, to register a social function, to, okay, this is how we behave as a Beta chapter or a Sigma Chi chapter or a Theta Phi Alpha chapter. This is what we're about. And I'm fearful that if we don't get really intentional about those lessons or our legacy, we are going to lose our secret sauce to some degree. There's something that happened that we learned along the way that, wait a minute, this is way bigger than Scott just joining this chapter at Middle Tennessee State University. There's something bigger is there. My bet is that's why you said yes when Sigma Chi called and asked you to serve, and I know that's Mac's experience. And so how do we create some brand integrity across the broad domains?
Yeah, I like a lot what you're saying, and I think there's even a scientific reason behind the need for it. I did a lot of reading in the last few years, just sort of kind of at an inflection point in my own life, and one of the realizations I've come to is sort of the mimetic nature of groups and how we are drawn to mimic each other. And so when we capture our history and we tell stories and we create a culture of striving and a culture of values-based men, and we tell stories around why that's important to us, what we do for ourselves is we give things for people to mimic. And I believe people will mimic bad culture or they will mimic good culture. And so we know that babies early on will mimic their parents' faces. And we know that the nature of when somebody puts a pool in the neighborhood, people start thinking through, well, we need a pool. And it's not accidental. It's actually a part of our biology. We are drawn to mimic each other. And so your word of intentionality is really important. If we know people are going to mimic each other, then let's be very intentional about what we want them to mimic. And if we're going to tell stories of our history and tell stories that give them permission to be vulnerable and permission to strive for something different than what their coach might have told them, or not just performance, but to strive for authenticity, wow, how can we show that? How can we show that in a deep way? And I think what Sigma Chi is trying to do is we're trying to make it where we create sort of reward and recognition for those, where you become ritual certified and you can wear that badge of honor. So we're trying to both adapt to what we know people are drawn to, what men are drawn to, is recognition and a lot of success and performance, and at the same time give some scientific reason of like, hey, we have a benefit here. We have a benefit as an organization by creating a stronger culture around our ritual. And so I think I would love to, and in fact, I would love to pull you in with some of our thought leaders in that area. I had a chance to participate in on our Founders Day, we did I moderated a panel discussion with our two thought leaders, our grand historians, our past grand historian and our current grand historian, who really told some of the sort of background stories, some of the things that people just salivate over. Fun examples of our founders, and we had a real interest in it. So I love your heads out there.
That's why we want to talk to folks like you, because when we just did we said the why, and then the why is that we want people to stop by here, whether they don't think there's value in fraternity and sorority, and maybe we give them something to see differently. Maybe it's an undergraduate who's like, what does lifetime look like? Because everybody's always talking about lifetime commitment. And they're like, I'm just trying to get through this week. Or it's alumni and alumni and people who have been involved at some age and stage, right? And they say, wow, I'm going to call somebody and just tell them thank you for having an impact on me. Or we know that when you Google fraternity and sorority, all the bad comes up. And we just wanted to put good into a space that we hope will just kind of take on a personality of its own. So happy that you're here.
Oh man, I just was resisting grabbing my phone and sending you a text as Dan was talking, just like, holy I can't believe you said yes. This is exactly the kind of conversation we want to have right here. So it's happening.